All right, so welcome everyone, and thank you so much for joining today's session. My name is Miriam Chamberlain, and I'm one of the event hosts for today. And I have the absolute pleasure of introducing two professionals. So we have Emily Zukauskas, I think I said that okay, and Wendy Pat Fong today joining us. Emily is a seasoned sales professional who has been working at HiBob for the last year and a half, and her focus is working with HR leaders to help them streamline their processes and engage their employees. Prior to HiBob, Emily worked at a few different startups while living and working abroad. In her spare time, she is an avid traveler and an amateur chef. Emily is accompanied today by Wendy Pat Fong, who is a seasoned HR leader with 10 plus years of experience, helping tech startups and consulting for various organizations. Wendy and Emily have known each other for many years and continue to work collaboratively to continuously improve employee experience, engagement, and culture. We are very happy and grateful to have you both with us today. But before I turn it over to Emily to get us started, I just wanted to highlight a couple key features. So there is the chat function that everyone will be utilizing throughout the presentation. So sharing ideas, comments, and thoughts. And then the final 10 minutes of the presentation, we'll be opening it up to a Q&A. There's two options for Q&A, so you can type in your question and I will moderate at the end of the session. Or if you'd like to go on stage, you can raise your hand and I would invite you on stage for an interactive Q&A. If anyone wants to tweet or post during the conference, please feel free to do so as well at hashtag SHRC21. I will also post that in the chat for everyone's reference. And just one final note to inform everyone that this session will be recorded. So at this time, I'll turn it over to you, Emily, to get us started. Thank you.
Perfect. Thanks very much, Miriam. And thank you so much to everybody who has joined the session today. So let me just start by sharing my screen and presenting a couple of different points here. We're going to be talking about supporting the employee experience through HR tech. So for anyone who isn't familiar with HiBob, our platform Bob is a modern, forward-thinking people management platform designed specifically for growing mid-sized companies. It allows you to automate processes, develop your people, and connect your teams. So as Miriam mentioned, I'm joined today by the lovely Wendy, who's really an expert in this space. And I just want to start by taking a moment to thank you, Wendy, for agreeing to have this fireside chat with me.
For sure. It's my pleasure.
So we're going to kick things off with a couple of questions. The first one being is that, what types of tools do you see yourself using? Do you see other people using to keep employees connected to their workplace?
Yeah, I think with COVID, HR professionals' life have just been turned upside down. It's like all of a sudden, you are faced with this very much, it's not a normal work from home. And I think that has been a big lesson for myself is when it first happened, we talked to our employees in terms of, this is just work from home, like we have done it before, it's all good. But I think the importance was to put this emphasis on, no, it's work from home during a pandemic. Right. So here you are, like in a multi-generational household for some of us, or kids at home. It becomes quite difficult to then be able to say, okay, it's just work from home, like just do what you don't normally do. I think for a lot of HR professional, even for myself, like working with different companies, is pretty much going back to the drawing board, is to look at, okay, what does connection means from the recruitment perspective all the way to potentially an exit interview, and very much going back to, okay, how do I make sure that people still live and breathe the core values and the culture that we have established within the organization? How do we make sure new hires also get that feeling of, oh, this is what the company is all about, but also how do we nurture our existing team members to make sure that we are still committed to them? How do they grow? How do we keep them engaged and connected within the organization? So with lots of companies that I have worked with, again, back to the drawing board is looking at, okay, what does our ATS do? our applicant tracking system. How do we make sure that each of the touch point that we have with our candidates are the right one, or the one that, you know, generate who we are as an organization. And then we looked at, of course, something like an HRIS, right? So like my profile mentioned, I have implemented HiBob twice. And for us, it was very much trying to figure out, okay, how do we provide this source of truth for our employees? Like, you know, there's no more that tap on the shoulder, like, you know, to be like, hey, like, how do I look at my vacation? Or, hey, where can I look at my policy? So very much giving our employees all the information up front so that they had transparency, they knew what was happening. We were able to blast out communication to make sure that it was open, it was transparent, they knew what was going on. But also the two big things that we saw has been very, very helpful, especially during COVID. The first one was the alignment of objective, right? So understanding, again, what is the company trying to achieve? Again, we don't have that, you know, kitchen sink conversation or the water cooler conversation of what are you working on anymore. So now we're relying on, you know, tech in terms of figuring out how do we align to the team, how is everyone coming together, how are we doing on a company level. But also the second point is around goal setting on a career perspective, right? Bringing all these uncertainties. Sometimes I feel like HR role is to make sure that we're removing this uncertainty for them to do the best work possible. So still talking about career. So what does career looks like for you, right? Like, sure, we're in a more remote environment, but how do we make sure that managers are still having that conversation? So this is where technology has come in, you know, really strongly, is in terms of how do we still create transparency? How do we provide our employees almost like that comfort of, if I have a questions, I know where to go. If I have a questions, I know where to look at. But also of, you know, all of the new hires, like a lot of tech companies are doing quite well. They're still hiring. So how do we make sure that we bring them in and, you know, get them connected straight away within, you know, the team members, within the different teams, within the different leaders. And again, like, this is where I think HR tech has come in very importantly, to be a partner with an HR professionals and to be able to extend, you know, like the culture, the values across everyone within the organization.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think like something interesting that you mentioned, I think like technology will never obviously replace that human interaction that you mentioned that we, you know, previously had at in the office, whether you're making a coffee with someone in the morning, but it's really about fostering that culture and trying to get that into your technology so that new joiners and people who have been at the company for a long time can experience that through tech at the moment.
Yeah, for sure.
So brings us into this next question, which is what kind of people data can managers use to motivate their teams?
Yeah, I think, you know, like when we talk about engagement, that's one thing that I have always very much taken a strong approach with, is for the whole organization to understand that anything like culture, anything like people engagement, it's not an HR thing. It's a whole company accountability. The same thing as, you know, like how the organization is doing financially. Yes, you might have a CFO, but everyone has an ownership in terms of what can I do to get there. And I think it's the same thing when it comes to motivating the team members. Often managers, and not, you know, any of their fault, are just a little bit lost in terms of how do I make sure that I motivate them. I think one of the things that has been super helpful with, you know, lots of companies I've worked with is just the power of survey. And I think sometimes people hear survey, they go, oh, you know, that 20-minute that you have to put into it. And I was like, no, it can be as easy as 2 questions. But it's very much, I think with COVID especially, the biggest thing was from the leadership team to be able to tell people, like, look, this is something new. We have not done this before. Like, I have never been through a pandemic before, so I don't want to assume what motivates you or what needs do you have during this period of time. So by being able to have, again, you elevating, like, you know, HR technology in terms of surveys and being able to ask, how can we support you? Is it on a extra time off? Is it around, extra, mental health care support? Is it like a better home setup? Is it more socials? These are the information that we need to get. And I think sometimes my manager just goes, oh, you know what, another survey. And it should be very much explained from, a perspective of, we want to hear from you because we do not know. And it's okay. I think that's the other thing too, is this is such like unknown circumstances that it's okay to be transparent and to be able to say, we don't know what we're doing. We're still trying to figure it out. So being able to look at surveys, but also the power of analytics, right? To be able to say, what are the different groups feeling? Like, because no one is going through the same thing, right? Like you have different teams going through different obstacles. So it's very much being able to break those things down using analytics and to be able to look at gender, right? Like, are our female employees having a little bit more issues because they have to be more of like a caregivers during this time? Like, how can we support them? Or like, how can we make sure that they are being provided with, daycare or like anything such as, help in terms of how to set up their office, is to be able to provide those type of information. And I think as a manager, it's very important for them to get a sense of, what is happening to my team, because we don't want to be a just one solution fits all, right? You want to be able to understand, especially during this time, people are going through, different things in their head. Like, is this the right job for me? Am I still having, am I still being challenged at work? And these are the things that you don't necessarily will get from like a huge company survey, but this is also to empower managers to have access to something like HiBob or any sort of survey platform for them to ask specific questions about their team, and then being able to elevate that into initiative of, okay, what can we put that into action? What are the quick wins that we can do, but what are also the long-term wins that we want to get out of this data?
Absolutely. I think it's really interesting that you say that, and being able to break down survey data into different demographics to identify what's meaningful to different people. Because you're right, it's not like a one type of solution fits all, especially in an unprecedented time like a pandemic. You have parents who are maybe having a harder time working from home because their children are also at home, whether they're not able to have access to daycare at the moment, or maybe they're also in school at home, when you have all these other issues like Wi-Fi connection issues and things that people really didn't think about. I don't think, at least I can speak for myself, I didn't really think about any of these before the pandemic. So yeah, it's really interesting.
I think the one thing that I would say also is often managers are like, those like lost child that we always focus on employee, we put them in the same bucket. But often I think managers need to have that love and that extra support, because often they are the group that are right in between, right? So they are leading by example. They have these groups of people, reporting into them. So they are going through a different, again, like you were mentioning, right, being able to group them in different roles as well, to be able to understand, as a manager, what can I do to support you? Because you're not only an individual contributors anymore. You're having, 8, 10 people coming to you with bandwidth issues, right? Like with not knowing how to time manage, like coming to you with sometimes personal issues, and you're the person absorbing all of these things in. So I think for us, in terms of HR professional, is also showing some love to the managers as well, right? So it's also being able to say, what can I do to help you? Because all of a sudden you're having like 10 things coming right at you, and often they either, don't know how to deal with that, because again, this is a new era that we're going through. They don't know necessarily how to deal with it, or they might need external resources, right? And this is where, again, as an HR professional, this is where we want to go in and say, okay, what are the different issues that you're getting from your team, right? Is it asking, where can they get mental health support? Is it asking, what are the different things like, more innovative way to create team building. So we also want to get those specific feedback through a survey to be able to know how to support them appropriately so that they are in the right state of mind to support all of the employees after that.
Yeah, makes a lot of sense. So let's talk about this next subject, which is how do you recognize and support employees' well-being?
Yeah, I think well-being has been a big topic, especially in like the HR realm right now. And it's understandable, right? Like we hear a lot of things about burnout. We hear like, high turnover because people just can't deal with it. There's no barriers to private and professional life anymore. Like right now, everyone is in my living room. Like, how does that work? So I think for us, of course, like I talked about survey, I'm a big fan of survey as long as, you are taking in this feedback and being ready and committed to do something about it. But I also found that one of the things that we really enjoyed, and it just happened that HiBob provide that option, was to be able to allow people to anonymously ask questions in real time. Like, again, survey fatigue, right? You don't want to be sending surveys out every week. And there might be things such as, like things that are a little bit more personal that you might not want to go to your managers, whether you haven't created that relationship with your manager yet, or it might be something a little bit more personal. So giving them an outlet to be able to talk about it. So we implemented Your Voice, which is, an option that HiBob offered, which allows employees to be able to go in, ask any questions, provide any concerns, any issues that they might have, that is in a very safe environment. So I would get a message that had no name, nothing. It would just be questions for me to be able to answer. And I think being able to have that at employees' fingertip really gave them the feeling of, if I have a problem, I know where to go. And it was important, I think, for a lot of HR professionals to also be transparent. So when we released that feature, I told everyone, I'm not a counselor, I'm not a trained psychologist. And I was like, but I am here to help you find the resources. Right. So whether you are going through some financial issues, whether you're going through some, housing issues or anything like that, come and talk to me so that I can then get you, the right resources, connect you with the right individuals, do any sort of introductions, so that, again, you're having that support in terms of, where to go within the organization. And it doesn't need to be a fanfare, right? It doesn't need to be anything like that. It's just a simple conversation of, how can I help you? Is there any things that you're encountering right now? And what can I do to help to support you? And I think implementing that option was really great, because we ended up doing a survey right after. And one of the questions that we asked is, if you are feeling lost, do you know who to go to? And a lot of people referred back to that option, which made me feel like, okay, I might not be getting a lot of messages every day, but at least I know that my employees feel like they are being taken care of.
Yeah. I love that. Creating a safe space for your employees. I think it's, obviously something that we do internally at HiBob, and it's something that we see a lot of our customers doing as well, whether they're utilizing that Your Voice tool, or if there's even other initiatives that are being put in place. Like, I think what you mentioned earlier on in this particular segment, that, that the lines were kind of blurred at the start of the pandemic in terms of when did your workday end and when did your personal life start. That's something that I personally really struggled with, just because, there was not very much else to do. So I just figured, why not, get ahead and work. And just think sometimes I was working quite crazy hours, and then I realized I'll burn out if I keep doing this. So even little things like going for a walk, or personally, I chose to buy a dog, and that really helped to get me out of the house and moving a little bit more. And I think just these little steps make a big difference in your overall well-being as an individual. But then having that safe space to communicate these issues that you might be having is something that is really important. And, obviously you don't need to use something like HiBob, but just having that space at your organization to be able to have those conversations is really crucial.
Yeah, the other thing too that I saw in terms of like a pattern is, again, everyone deals with uncertainty very differently, right? And I think especially at the start of COVID, when you would hear about, the layoffs and all of these, like all of these, consequences of going for a pandemic, I think it also drove a lot of fear. And when we would look at our vacation data, for example, like we would see like people would not take time off at all, right? And like in the different organization I have worked with, they have generous time off. And when we looked at the data, we were seeing that, some people like for like 8 months has taken no time off at all. And it was those things that then this is what we wanted to encourage them to actually do. And this is where we want to provide managers these data to be able to say, hey, like half of your team haven't taken a time off.
Yeah.
Like, what is happening? What can we do to support them? What can we do to cover for them? Is it like an issue of bandwidth? Like, what is going on? How can we help? So I think in terms of, I think a lot of people think about like, like have people taken time off or not? But it's also using that data to our own advantage, right? To be able to say, have you taken a day off to just breathe? To just, to what you were saying, being able to just have a day where you just want to go outside, want to spend time with your family and not having to, hear that Slack notification and be like, oh my God, I'm missing out on work. So being able to use those things as well in terms of any data that you're collecting, like vacation tracking is definitely a big one.
Yeah, it's interesting that you bring that up. I think I personally felt like I didn't want to take any vacation at the start of the pandemic because I'm a really avid traveler and I always want to utilize my vacation days to the fullest. And so I thought, this pandemic is not going to be a long-term thing. I'm going to save my vacation for the summer and I'll go away for like 2-3 weeks. And then slowly over the winter, you realize like, there's not really light at the end of this tunnel coming anytime soon. So we started putting in place some initiatives internally at Bob to encourage people to start taking some time off. Otherwise, we knew people were going to start burning out. So yeah, absolutely. So next question, how do you think going back to the office is going to impact retention?
I think this is a loaded question for sure. And I think all of us HR professionals right now just have it at the back of their mind. And I think a lot of people are taking a step back to see what's happening, right? So what are like, the leaders in their industries, what are they doing? So I think it's going to be a very much like a new challenge in terms of the hybrid work is how do you make sure that people that are not commuting into the office are still feeling that culture, again, that values that everyone feels. And I think it's going to be really interesting in terms of what that looks like for retention. And I think one of the things that I know is how do we make sure, like, I think there will be a lot of new best practices that will start coming out, right? So if you have a team of, 5 and 2 people are working from home, how do we make sure that during a meeting that they are still included, right? Because in person, it's so much easier to just wave or speak over somebody else, whereas you want to make sure that there is that sort of engagement going on. In terms of how do I think it's going to affect retention, I think it will, like with team members that we have talked to, like I'm sure many of you have done the surveys, right? Like how ready are you to come to work? Like how often would you want to come to work? And we have seen that people miss it. I don't think it's a matter of, oh, we don't like the office. But then when we asked, okay, what do you actually miss?
Yeah.
Right? Like what is the thing about the office that you actually miss? Because these might be the answers for us to then figure out how do we make sure that we can scale that. Even if you don't come into the office. So we heard a lot of things like, things such as like, I just want to be with my colleagues. Like, maybe just that social aspect of you have been isolated. You just want to be with like-minded individuals that speak your language, that we're all coming together, that we're aligned under the same vision in terms of the organization and being able to talk about these cool things that we're doing. I think the other things that a lot of people talked about is the collaboration. right? Like it's so hard. I'm sure, again, many of you have tried to collaborate through Miro or any of his tool. It's just not the same. It's not the same as picking up your markers and going to the whiteboard and doing all of these things in. So I think there will be a desire for people to come back. I think from an HR perspective, again, it's how do we elevate the best practices, right? So maybe having a little bit of guidelines to be able to say, in terms of onboarding, we would love you to come to the office at least for the first couple of weeks, just for you to get a sense of who is in here, like how do we work. And again, that face-to-face is not going to be the same as on Zoom, right? It's just not going to be like that. So maybe adding guidelines in terms of, okay, if we're brainstorming, so once a quarter as a team, maybe you want to come together and brainstorm what are your goals for next quarter. Maybe we want to do that a little bit more in person. So being able, but I think the biggest thing in terms of retention is a lot of people, through surveys, for research, have said that they finally feel empowered.
Mm-hmm.
They feel empowered when they have asked to work from home before, and people have said no, like your productivity will decrease, or we don't trust you or anything like that. And all of a sudden you're proving to them that, hey, I can do this. Yes, I work from home. Yes, I'm in my PJ, but I can still do what my job description is asking me to. So I think that's where the empowerment, and that's what people will be looking forward to, is that, are you an organization? Do you have a culture where you empower me to know when's the best time for me to be at home? So any independent work or anything where I'm putting my head down and executing. And do you trust me to know that when there are things that are more collaborative, that require more brain power, more interaction, I will come into the office. And I think that will make a big difference for people to stay within the organization that they are at right now, that yes, I have a trust, yes, I have an empowerment to decide what's best for me. But if it's not there, like, again, I think a lot of organizations are going to be offering that as almost like a perk, right? And you want to make sure that your employees don't look elsewhere, so you're able to provide them that. And then again, breaking down into what do you enjoy about being in the office, and trying to find ways elevating HR technology to make sure it's streamlined across everybody.
Yeah, said a lot of really interesting points that I want to dissect a little bit more. I'm conscious that we have only a limited amount of time, but I think this whole experience has been really eye-opening for both employees and for employers. I think employers have now realized that they can trust their employees to work from home. They can be as productive at home as they are in the office. And then I think on the opposite side, employees have also realized that, for example, I can speak for myself. Like, I love working from home. I find with certain types of tasks, I'm far more productive. I can pack a lot more into my day because I'm taking out the commute. I'm taking out my breaks where I get up and I walk around a lot. So for some things, I love being at home. And then there's that social element to work that I do still miss, because I'm a very extroverted person and I love connecting with people face to face. But I think the new world of work, or whatever you want to call it, I think it's going to be a really interesting time over the course of the next year to see how different companies adapt to all the changes. And it's going to be like a whole new adaptation to what we just went through. It's like a whole new learning experience. As if there wasn't enough change already in the last year and a half, we're going to have to go through it all over again. So it's going to be interesting. So how does onboarding impact employee retention? I know there's a lot of statistics around this particular subject. What has it meant for you in your experience?
I always see onboarding as, your first dates, right? It's like whether the interviewing process, the recruitment process is you swiping left or right. But when it comes to onboarding, it's actually that first date of really understanding, what is this company all about? And I think with, it's really important. And I think that's where a lot of HR professionals like myself and many of, us in this session is, how do we make sure that we are giving them a real sense of what that looks like? So something, that I know has worked really well is to be able to properly establish what is a 30-60 90 days. So what are the expectations? And these are the things that you start putting in place, when you're in person, it's easier. It's a little bit more fluid. Like, again, like if you have a question, you can just tap your manager on your shoulder and ask. Whereas when we're looking at, onboarding, for a lot of us, we are onboarding remotely, which is something, again, completely new. If you haven't done it before, is how do we help in terms of creating the right expectations so that during that, onboarding session, the candidate doesn't go, oh my God, like, have I made a mistake? Why did I pick this company? And I think that's what it is, right? You want to be able to provide like a lot of understanding of this is how the company goes, like this is what we do, these are the practices that we have, and again giving the experience of this is the culture, this is the core values of the organization. And again, like I was mentioning before, having an HRIS in terms of the source of truth is empowering the new hires to know where to go and find the information, learn more about the company, what have we previously done, and for them to be able to start getting a sense of, putting the puzzle into place, right? To be able to say, yep, what, this is fully what was expected within my organization, like when I was interviewing about the organization. So I think the impact is definitely huge, but not only from a hiring manager perspective, right? But how do we foster, again, that teamwork, that collaboration? I know one of the questions from Gallup that I have always loved is they ask you the question of, do you have a best friend at work? Because what we have seen through research is that people were more engaged at work, they were a little bit more productive, they were less likely to leave when they knew they had that support system in place. So that's the other thing with onboarding, right? Is how do we make sure that you have a first impression within the organization, but also within your team? So I think, like, especially as we're going through like a remote, like a hybrid, where some people will come into the office, some people will go remote, is again what I was talking about, is going back to the drawing board, is in terms of how have we previously done it before, and how do we adapt it to the new way of working now, and making sure that the same essence is being transferred from what we have done previously to this new way of working, which is remote/hybrid.
Yeah. Are there any kind of tips or tricks that you have to help people find that best friend in the office?
I think someone mentioned in the chat box, like a buddy system. We have done like a buddy system for a lot of teams right now. And I think the really interesting thing about that is, I have worked with a lot of smaller tech companies where, like it's slowly growing. So often when you ask someone, what is your career aspiration, often management come into play. And a buddy system this is where it's a great way for them to start stretching that muscle, right? You're not managing that team members, but can you help them with the onboarding? Right? So how would you start to practice these skills of communication, of being able to provide that support, to be proactive and ask, hey, is everything okay? Like, so even like little conversation like that is something that you want to have under your belt as you progress towards your career of being a manager. So a buddy system, like what we have found is when we did it that way, when we explain to people that, look, there are a lot of skills you can pull out of it. There's a lot of skills you can practice when you and welcome a new team members into your team. And that's why we have seen a lot of people start raising their hand for the buddy system. It's because they're just kind of like, hey, maybe I'll get a little taste of what it feels like to be a manager in terms of supporting my new team members to come on board. So that has been really helpful for sure.
Yeah, I love that idea. We have buddies at Bob, and they remain your buddy throughout the entire journey that you go through at the organization. So you always have that go-to person. And I think oftentimes it does foster these relationships with your colleagues to become friendships. So it's really nice. I love those types of programs.
Emily and Wendy, I'm just going to dive in. So I'm just trying to be respectful of time. So we do have a couple minutes for some Q&A, but thank you so much for all this information. Very insightful, and certainly something that we are all challenged with at this time in HR and in management and leading people. So thank you very much. We do have one question that came in. So what are some creative ways you can replicate the company culture when working from home? Great question.
One of the big things for us has been to make sure that people still retain the habit. So as an example, at one of the previous companies I work at, is they used to do lunch and learn. So every Wednesday at 12 o'clock, the company would cater lunch, and they would have one or two team members do a little presentation about something of their own interest. When remote happened, I think a lot of people were just kind of like, oh my God, like we're going to lose that. So one of the way that we did was, we sent out the lunch gift card. So for people to be able to come together, and sometimes we did not even have a presentation. Sometimes we just break down into mini group sessions for people to, again, have that feel of, oh, I'm having lunch with my team members, so they can they can have things from like, oh, what did you order, like to give them that sense of normalcy. I think it's something really big. So with a lot of organizations that I work with, especially when the working from home thing happened, a lot of people start panicking to be able to say, oh, what do we do now? And we're like, no, we need to be the driver of keeping these habits, keeping these activities going on. And there are different ways of doing it. And I think, again, we wanted to be very transparent. So at 7 Geese, the previous companies I worked with, we were very transparent with everyone. And again, just being very vulnerable and say, we don't know what we're doing. It's going to be a trial and error. This is a journey that we are all in it together. So we're not going to come and tell you what to do because this is what we think. We want to hear from you. So what are the things that you want to take on? And also the other things that we have done is, managers have stepped up. Managers have stepped up. They have done I know some of the managers will have every Thursday afternoon, they'll have a happy hour and they'll play a game together. Sometimes they'll invite another team to come and join them. So it's been able to create it. Again, it's to be able to figure out what did people really love when they came into the office? What is the thing about our company culture that they really appreciate? And for us to be able to take that next step of, okay, what does that look like? So how do we make sure that, we're still giving them that in a different form, but also making them understand that the more you tell us what you need, the more we're going to be able to customize it to you.
Fantastic. And I love what you said, Wendy, that notion of vulnerability as well. So we don't know. And sometimes it's the easiest thing is just to ask, right? And collaborate with the team to see what they're looking for as well. So really great point. We do have another question here and we just have a couple more minutes left, but did you do anything different, creative for those employees who otherwise are field-based employees, example, sales, during the pandemic?
We wanted to make sure that they were not forgotten. I think sometimes, again, I feel a lot for managers, I feel a lot for sales team, is sometimes, you just feel like, oh, they have a thing, don't worry about them. But again, when we did our survey and we asked them, they said that's one of the things that they were missing, right? Because back in the office, they were able to come back and tell everyone the stories of what has happened. And this is not happening now. So one of the things that we have done is once a week during our company meeting, we really want each of the teams to be able to elevate their wins, right? So that everyone understand that, again, it's not like a sales win, but this is a whole organization behind it. So very much allowing them to be able to share those stories with everybody, whether it's the up, whether it's the down, but again, giving that transparency, but that strong connection with them. Because again, with a lot of field-based employees, sometimes they see the office as home, right? I'm coming home, I'm coming to share all of these things. And you know what? The interesting thing is, as an organization, bottom-up leadership is so important, right? We want to be able to go to them and ask them, hey, what are you hearing? What can we do as a company? How does that affect our product, our services, our offering? So being able to give them a platform to elevate themselves a little bit more. But we have also found, again, salespeople just had a little bit of a different need. Sometimes I know with some companies I have consulted with, when COVID hit, and if they were very commission based, that was something that was in their head, right? So again, it's not a company-wide engagement issues that we're looking at, but it's something very team specific. So how do we support them? How do we make sure that they know we have their back, that we understand that the pandemic is not their fault, so they can't be penalized, in terms of a commission, but how can we make sure that as a company we work together to give them a sense, again, of normalcy, giving them a sense that you've been taken care of, so that they can also commit back to the organization.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Wendy and Emily. This wraps up our session. So just some final remarks. At 12:10, so just in a little while, we're going to be having another segment that I encourage you all to go to. It's titled, "It's Not Them, It's You, Why Employees Break Up with Their Managers and What to Do About It." So you don't want to miss that one. And we encourage everyone to visit the virtual trade show. It is an amazing platform. You'll have a chance to network, connect in with at the virtual seating. And then there's also, I think Emily and Wendy, you're going to be sitting at one of the booths for Hi Bob. So if you want to go and engage, ask some more questions, they'll be there to answer your questions there as well. And then there's also a virtual random networking tool, I guess, that you could use also. So I encourage everyone to do that as well. So thank you again, ladies, and I hope everyone has a great day. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.